Greetings sailors, and welcome to a viewer warships replay, and also me once again suffering from the effects of sleep deprivation. Yes, it's been a fun couple of nights. Well, actually last night was worse than the night before, but then the night before that was also not much fun, if that makes any sense. No, I haven't slept much. I've had one good night's sleep in like 4 days or something like that. I really don't know why. Anyway. So, this is the Alsace, and this is Desert Fox 51, who is commanding it over on the NA server. I don't have this ship myself yet, but it does seem like a pretty capable Tier 9 battleship, and it actually has a slightly more normal turret arrangement, because although the Richelieu is pretty good, sometimes having only forward-facing turrets can be a bit on the awkward side, as it is with other ships that are similarly designed, such as the Izumo and the Nelson, and of course the Dunkirk as well. So actually having a rear turret to work with puts this something a bit closer to something like the Iowa, which has exactly the same turret arrangement, of course. As for the rest of the characteristics, I honestly don't really know. It's, you know, going to have good secondaries. I assume it has decent AA. It's got the speed boost, of course, which is actually a really useful characteristic. I was a bit skeptical about the speed boost when it was introduced on French battleships to begin with, from Tier 8 and up. But especially when it comes to dealing with destroyers that might be nearby, it's a really, really useful tool. Other times, of course, it is handy just for getting from A to B a bit quicker. But if you're in this kind of situation where you're stationary, I mean, not exactly this situation, but you know there are destroyers nearby or somebody spots torpedoes incoming, you can basically change your speed very, very quickly indeed. You get a lot of extra acceleration from using the speed boost. So a nice early couple of salvos at the expense of that Otago, who's feeling rather bruised right now. He's also got quite a few teammates with him, but just glancing at the minimap you can see that nobody is really contesting anything. They've lost a destroyer already, but it's basically the enemy team that is heavily taking the initiative right now. They are capping all 3 cap circles, and there's not really a lot going on from his own team to try and do much about that so far. So that's not great. Also not great is the fact that they have 3 ships over by the A cap who are almost certainly going to have a very hard time getting away and coming out of that alive, because there are, well, there's only 1 extra ship there, but there's also the potential of stuff coming over from towards the B cap. So those ships are in trouble. They're kind of split apart from the rest of this team. So they might be in difficulties, even if they don't quite realise it yet. So you'll have noticed that Desert Fox is trying a bit of HE here, which can have its place. I know we all decry the HE spamming battleships, but there are times when sticking a fire on somebody can actually be quite a useful thing. Of course, if all you're firing in your battleship is HE, that's not a good thing, but that's definitely not really going to be the case with Desert Fox here. And I say not a good thing because, of course, there are the British battleships where you can do it and get away with it, but for most other lines, in fact, really all other lines, it's not going to serve you well at all. So having failed to get a fire going, he's back to the AP and trying to hit this Lion that is retreating and giving him a nice broadside. Certainly a target he's likely to do more damage to than the more bow-on Lion. And of course it doesn't have the heal that the Lion has. So although the Lion is the more kind of valuable target, with the angling they have right now, the HE is, you know, that's going to be the way to go to get some fires stuck, basically. And then at that point he might keep firing HE, or he might go back to AP, I guess we'll see. But it's not a bad idea, because it bleeds some health, it forces the Lion to either use their damage control party, or if they're sensible, you know, obviously they won't, but it, you know, forces them potentially also to maybe use one of their heals when they don't necessarily want to. They have at least stopped this cap from going to the enemy, but they've not actually taken it themselves yet either. The enemy team, though, comfortably has the other two caps. They've killed one of the ships that was over by A, and just because they haven't taken this cap doesn't mean there aren't still nasty things around. They have killed that lion, though. They were out of position enough that there was a sustained amount of fire from this side. There was enough things shooting at it that even its legendary heal couldn't save it. So that's useful. That's a dangerous ship taken out of the equation. Even a dangerous ship horribly out of position can go down pretty damn quick. It's one of the things you learn when you get to play high tier battleships for the first time, and you've got all these hit points and all this armour and these big guns, and so you're invincible, right? Yeah, not so much. Definitely not so much. Now, I'm not entirely sure why the destroyer laid smoke for him. Perhaps thinking that that Desert Fox would hold fire, although he'd have to hold fire for a while in the smoke to actually get unspotted. But no, he's chosen not to, and it's not like he asked for the smoke. It was a nice gesture, I guess, from the Z-52, but laying smoke for a battleship these days especially, you really want to check that it's what they actually do require of you, or that they want from you, because otherwise it's just going to be a wasted smoke. So they're finally capping. Hooray! Bad news, however, is that, well, they're not doing so well points-wise. In terms of ships, this has been pretty equal so far, but because they don't have the cap circles, it's starting to slide away from them. It's not unrecoverable yet, but if they let it get too far in the enemy team's favour, they're basically just not going to have the time to do anything about it. Because there are plenty of situations I've encountered personally where, yeah, you actually end up might have, well, this is, you know, this is the lack of sleep right here. You might have more ships than the enemy team, but they've gotten such a points lead that all they really need is one cap circle and a little bit of time, and they've won. And equally, I've been on teams where we have won with inferior numbers of ships, in a situation where the enemy team is finally making something of a fight back, but it's just too late. So you really do have to pay attention to what the points are doing. But in this case, because there are so many ships left on each side, there is still a chance of doing this. There is absolutely still a chance of doing this. Because if they can just kill enough stuff, sometimes that's enough to overcome losing the ticking victory points. But it helps if you can take some cap circles at the same time. They have lost their destroyers at this stage, though. The Z-46 was very low health. I didn't quite catch what they died to in the end, but although they have more or less cleared this end of the map, with the enemy destroyers still being very much alive and kicking, they've pretty much lost their eyes and ears outside of radar. And of course, in a radar ship, you have to actually be close enough to use it. That, by the way, yeah, that's going to be a Neptune. The enemy team actually has, is it 2 of them? I think 2 Neptunes. And, well, here's the thing. The smoke will stop people actually seeing you, and their shots against you will be less accurate because they can't lock onto you. But it doesn't stop them having a guess at where you are, especially if you're just sat stationary in said smoke. And so, although that Neptune wasn't spotted, although you can't use the new minimap aiming marker, or whatever you want to call it, in that case to exactly position your aim over where they were last spotted, still, they were stationary, and you can just do the good old-fashioned eyeballing method. And because it was a Neptune, and because it was broadside, and because these are big old battleship guns, quite a lot of them in fact, you get, what, 12 guns on this? Yeah, that was a nice little hit right there. He had to feel quite nice about that. and I'm sure equally the Neptune came away with a slightly sour taste. But maybe that'll make them learn to move around a little bit in the smokescreen. It also perhaps wasn't an optimal position because it's easier, or at least I've seen it argued that it's easier to try and guess shots like that when you actually have some background to guess against. If you've got a fixed marker such as an island to give you a better idea of where exactly they're shooting from. Whereas from open water, it is, in theory at least, a bit harder. So all that's bumped him up to well over 100,000 damage. In fact, there's another Citadel right there on that Colorado, who is now dead with the assistance of Desert Fox. So, yeah, they're still down on points, but they're slowly bringing it back. The effect of having all of these teammates concentrated in one place. Well, at that point, the enemy team could have just turtled up. They had the cap circles. They could have just turtled up and made this team come to them. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But in this kind of situation, players sometimes they'll see the victory counter and they'll go, we're winning, we should press the attack. And they ignore how many actual ships are left in play. And in this case, because there was equal numbers of ships, it's starting to really go against them. Now, unfortunately, he is caught unawares by the Fletcher torps, but that seemed like a wide spread to me, so that wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. It might even have just been a speculative drop. It might not have been aimed at him in particular. It might have been sort of aimed in the vague direction of him and the couple of cruisers that were also in line there. So I'm not entirely sure, but it's a bit less health that he's got now and a bit less health that he can heal back as well, because of course that counts as heavy damage. It also means he has to burn for a while, having used his damage control party. So they're starting to swing this back in their favour. They've got the upper hand in terms of numbers, still down on points, but it's not like they're critically short on time. There's still a good couple of minutes left. However, one of their number, that Iowa, is retreating to the next map. It's not entirely clear. Well, it will become clear from the chat, but at the moment it's not entirely clear. Now, there is one enemy ship left up there, the other Neptune. That Iowa's firing HE shells in a situation where they really shouldn't be, so again, that maybe tells you about the skill level of that player. But if you know anything about this game, you'll also know that the Neptune has torpedoes. Now, count the number of enemy destroyers. The enemy destroyers are still alive. There's 2 of them. Destroyers have torpedoes, right? No other ships have torpedoes, right? Right? Well, that's how the Iowa apparently sees it, because they become convinced, or apparently were convinced, that there is a destroyer up in the north of the map. But we know exactly where the destroyers were last spotted. And in fact, we know where the destroyers still must be, because unless they've crawled all the way around the outside, which there probably isn't time to have done. Although, you know, the Fletcher could have turned round and gone back north, but it seems a little unlikely, and as it will prove to be not the case at all, because guess what is about to be spotted in front of Desert Fox. Yeah, with that Fletcher there, and the remaining other destroyer, the Shiratsuyu, also very definitely to the south, because we saw some torpedoes flying across the south earlier on that were definitely not from the Fletcher. Yeah, there's nothing up there, but the Iowa, and there we go, fighting a DD. At this point, we know where the destroyers are. We really do, but this Iowa is being ultra cautious and not being terribly effective. But there's only 3 enemy ships left at this point, so maybe that Iowa being horribly out of position won't matter too much, because it's not like the enemy Fletcher appears to be being any more effective. Perhaps they're out of spokes at this point. That might be a fair assumption to make, but it still makes one wonder exactly what they think they're going to accomplish in this position right here. It's not the best spot for a surprise ambush unless somebody's actually pushing through. It's harder to come through, especially when somebody knows that you're there. And they keep making these rather ham-fisted drops that really don't have a huge chance of doing anything when he's going at that low of a speed. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure what that Fletcher was doing, but at least at this point the Iowa... And it's nice to see that nobody in the chat was going, OMG, you're such a noob, to the Iowa player. But yeah, the Iowas figured out that, oh yeah, no, okay, there's no destroyers there. With the Shiratsu having been killed by the Belfast, that just leaves these two enemy ships. Now, unfortunately, the Fletcher dies, and I say unfortunately because Desert Fox is sitting on 4 kills. So if he wants that Kraken, he's going to have to do something about it. And although that was a theoretically really nice shot at the Missouri's just under the turret area, which possibly has a name, I don't know. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to hit that, and so if he wants to make sure this kill is his, with everybody now pounding on this Missouri, he's going to have to take matters into his own hands and definitively secure the kill, which he does. So, 158k damage. This wasn't even the highest damage game that he sent me, but this was just such a fun way to get a Kraken, I suppose. You know, he wanted the Kraken, and he went for it. And unsurprisingly, with a performance like that, yeah, it was still a pretty good amount of damage. He got the Kraken, and 2,800, nearly 2,900 base XP as well. So that was a pretty good performance. That was a nice outing in the Iowa. And who doesn't enjoy a bit of ramming action, especially if it results in getting a medal? So I guess if there's any kind of moral you can take from this replay, it would be that you really should pay attention to what's going on around you when you're playing World of Warships, or, well, just generally in life too, I suppose. But particularly in this case, the enemy team got way overconfident, pushed in when they absolutely didn't have the numbers to carry it through, and of course that equally goes for that Iowa player on Desert Fox's own team as well, just again absolutely not paying attention to the information that the game was giving them. Desert Fox, however, certainly was paying attention, as evidenced by the score screens. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I wasn't too loopy, hopefully, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and as always, stay tuned for more.